turn off the notifications.
Perfect. Sweet, we are going to start right about now. Hi everyone, really excited to be meeting everyone on Voice Out Wednesdays, and today we have with us another really special guest. As you all are familiar, we bring interesting guests from the Web3 crypto blockchain space every Wednesday on our platform Voice of Crypto, and today we're really excited to have with us Russell from 8-Bit Arcade, and we're going to talk a lot more about decentralization, gaming, blockchain, and Web3 throughout today's episode. Hello, Russell. It's my pleasure to have you
Hello.
on our podcast today. How are you feeling?
I'm good. Thank you very much for having us. It's a pleasure to meet you. Thanks for having me.
Likewise, I'm sure the pleasure is ours. And today we'll be having a really interesting and hopefully insightful session about blockchain, gaming, decentralization, Web3, and empowering through blockchain. But before that, if you could just give a little bit of brief about yourself, what are you currently doing? What sort of projects are you involved in at the moment?
Okay, so I'm Russell Bryant. I'm the founder at 8-Bit Arcades. I've been in the Web3 space probably since about 2015, 17 sort of time as an investor mainly. And this is the first project that I've started up as of towards the end of last year, really. We took over. I've been involved in various projects from gaming to DeFi. And other projects around the sort of Web3 space. And I think like a lot of people, I've had a lot of bad experiences. Rug pulls and other things happening out there. And I think you learn from it. And being a bit of an entrepreneur myself, I saw an opportunity come along with this particular project in the gaming space, which is looking very buoyant in the near term. And I thought it was a time to actually shape something. And there was a little niche in the market that we thought we could certainly sort of find a space in and nurture. And that's kind of where we are. 8-Bit Arcade is a Web2, Web3 gaming platform. Mm-hmm. And we're there to incubate indie game developers and help them get to market. But we're also there to sort of onboard the traditional gamers into the space. So at the moment, what we tend to have in the gaming space is a very sort of separate Web2 traditional gaming space and a Web3 space. And we feel the Web3 sort of blockchain sort of technology has got a lot to offer to gaming. And unfortunately, there's a very small percentage of gamers that are actually in this space. And it would be great to sort of try and introduce and break down the barriers and get that 95% of gamers that are still playing traditional games into our lovely Web3 blockchain related space. So that's kind of what 8-Bit Arcade is all about, really, is to onboard those gamers, bring them into the Web3 space, playing Web3 games, and helping assist the small game developers to bring their games to market.
So from 2017 to now, while it doesn't seem like a lot of years, if one's in the Web3 space, 5 years is a long-ass time in this space. And what did your journey in the Web3 space look like? And before that, I would also like to know, how did you make the transition from Web2 to Web3?
So my journey personally, I think I touched on, was as an investor originally in the space, and I was involved in quite a lot of projects. Some did well, some not so well. Obviously, been through a couple of bear markets now, and we tend to see the markets sort of completely drop out really during these bear markets, and a lot of the audience that we used to have during the bull markets just isn't there. But these times right now where we are great times to be building projects, which is what we're doing right now. We're building out, we're making networks, collaborations and partnerships so that when the market does pick up again, we'll be in a great position to sort of capitalize on that. But yeah, I started off as an investor in a project. I've been a business man most of my life, had my own businesses, but I've never run a business in the blockchain space. What is really fascinating right now is that when I started back in 2017, the blockchain space was very immature. And it was people that were just trying to become overnight millionaires. And what we're starting to see now, which is a wonderful thing, is actually you've got genuine business startups that are seeing the space as an opportunity to raise capital. And we're a prime example of that. And that's a nice place to see that growth coming in now. It's no longer just about investment and trying to get rich quick overnight. It's actually about genuine businesses trying to build and create their space within the Web3 sort of family, really. And there's a lot of networking to be had out there. There's a lot of support to be had out there. And it's a great space to be in, really. So that's kind of my journey and where we are with 8-bit. And what was the second part of your question? Sorry, remind me.
How did your journey into how was your foray into Web3 looking like when you did that? How did the transition happen, or what sort of intrigued you to apart from the investment angle, what else did draw you sort of towards this space?
Well, I think as a startup business, looking at traditional means, it's say you were starting up a gaming sort of platform like we are in the Web2 space or traditional space, trying to raise capital is enormously difficult in the first place. I mean, it is now, even at the moment, the Web3 space, but it becomes a lot easier the minute you have tokens and NFTs for you as a startup business with a very small team to actually start generating some capital or raising capital towards your project. So in that sense, there's a lot more possibility there for business and entrepreneurs to actually start their businesses. There's more access to capital and various means of funding as well than there is in what I would call the real world. If you were sort of registering a company at a company's house and having to start from scratch and doing your networking and hitting the street, really, it's hard graft. It's really hard graft. Whereas in a mobile world now, where we're all sort of like connecting over the internet and we're able to make partnerships with other companies that are on the other side of the globe, we would never have dreamt of doing that if we just were in a traditional sort of space. So that is a wonderful thing. I've made some network contacts with, a gaming group out in Australia. And I would never have dreamt of doing that if I wasn't in the Web3 space. So those are the opportunities that offer us as startups in the Web3 space. And that's a wonderful, place to be and opportunities for us all. And we just got to take it by the horn and sort of run with it. And I think it's only going to grow and get better, to be honest, moving forward. I mean, I picture the whole startup sort of ecosystem in the Web3 space a bit like a company that's been around a few years in the Web2 space who's looking to basically list their company on a major stock exchange. And they obviously would go through a very lengthy process and costly process of trying to get some shares on a market and being able to generate that capital. Whereas you can do a very similar model in the Web3 space a lot easier and a lot quicker. It's much more maneuverable, much more flexible, and you've got access to much or more in-depth type of investors, really. So that's really cool. And our investors don't have to be experienced investors. They can be your genuine sort of like gamers, which is really important. If you're looking to build a community project, it's hugely important to have your gamers on board as your investors as well. So that is definitely possible in the Web3 space, but much more difficult in a traditional setting. So that's why we love the Web3.
Absolutely, it does make a lot of sense. When we talk about opportunities, gaming as a sector has always been looked upon as like a low-hanging fruit when we talk about decentralization or blockchain gaming. I mean, I'm sure gamers have had a sense of ownership, digital ownership, before anyone else did. So, when you thought about sort of merging gaming and blockchain, what sort of a market research did you do, and what sort of how was the market looking back then when, let's say, you must have started 8-bit to now? Have there been considerable shifts in how people and their psychologies work, or what have you witnessed?
So the gaming industry is really interesting because it's historically speaking been quite innovative in the way it brings in new business models. I mean, we 8-bit arcade is a prime example. We use part of our image is retro gaming. You can see the arcades behind me. I came from an arcade sort of background growing up in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
That was a wonderful thing. You used to have to go to a machine that used to have a single game on it. And you'd have to put some coins in there and play the game. And that's moved on to when they used to have consoles. So Nintendo Entertainment System is one that I had as a kid. I used to have the Sega Mega Drive. So you went from going to a venue in town to going and playing in your bedroom. And the social aspect there changed when it came to gaming. And now what we've got is, although we still have consoles, we have online gaming now. So you don't necessarily need a console or a machine to play your games. You can play it from your mobile phone, or you can play it on the internet as long as you've got internet access. Yeah. So gaming has changed again. It's got a new evolution to it. And I think that next evolution for us is the Web3 space. And although there is big resistance now from AAA gaming studios to want to get involved in blockchain, blockchain has got a lot to offer gaming, and one of them being that the end user can actually own their assets. So what we see a lot in traditional gaming is that if you were to play a AAA game online, when you purchase your skin or your avatar in that game, you don't actually own it. All that it's on your account, and every time you log in, you have that avatar. But if something was to happen to that game, or the company was to go bust, you would lose that asset. It would no longer have any value. So what we envisage happening in the Web3 space, and there's a lot of talk around it, is interoperability. And once you purchase that one particular asset for that game, you can actually use it across other games and everything. So that's really exciting. And it also gives much more value to the end user as well, because they're not just buying something that they can use in one game, they can actually use it in multiple other games, and they can start going across from community to community, and cross-pollination, I call it, of communities, which in itself is extremely valuable. So the gaming industry has got a great future in Web3. And I think a lot of these AAA gaming studios that probably are being a little bit slow to adopt it will eventually come on board with it when they realize that their current business models are going to be going out of date the more and more people start adopting Web3. Absolutely. So yeah, that's kind of touched on it really. And so there is a shift, there is a dramatic shift happening. We also see a massive shift in more and more players going into mobile or mobile driven. And there's a few different ways or angles you can look at that. Is that over 50% of gaming worldwide now is done on mobile phones or mobile devices. So there's less and less of it being played every year on PCs, on consoles, and on traditional sort of gaming hardware. So, and there's various reasons why that is happening. One is because obviously everybody's got mobile phones now. They're the thing, they're easy accessible. If you go to places like India and Africa, buying a console and a PC is very hard. People haven't got that kind of money really, but having a mobile phone is becoming more and more current. So they're getting access to it. Also, the hardware on the mobile phones is much more capable now. So we can start playing better and better games. So there is that as well. But also we're seeing that gaming, which never used to be accessible to some of these developing nations now, that now that they can actually access gaming on mobile phones, we're starting to see the play to earn sort of model come into life in those sort of countries, because people who were never able to make a living now can actually make a few bucks playing a game online in the Web3 space. And for the likes of, which is why Axie Infinity did so well in the likes of Philippines and Indonesia, is because those people probably really struggled to get a few dollars a day to put some food on the table, whereas they could go on this game and just by being on it, they could quite easily earn $1. And that was a revenue or money for them, income that they never had the opportunity to do before. So gaming is changing. We see those revenue streams and those business models certainly developing in the future, and massively in those developing nations. There's going to be a lot of growth in gaming within there in the mobile sector. Absolutely. So there's quite a few sort of when it comes to research and where we get our data from, there's quite a lot of reports out there that are readily available that you can access. But we're relying on, obviously, your local governments to do research on these things, on the industries and where they're going. Generally speaking, a lot of the gaming industry was based in wealthy nations. a lot of the back-end development we're starting to see increasingly, if not a lot of it, is run through the likes of India and developing nations now, where the resources are there and it's actually a lot more cost effective to get games developed there. But yeah, it's a really interesting space to be in. There's almost like a shift happening, and we're currently part of it. And I think when we used to look back at like the Game Boy, and that was a massive revolution in gaming, actually to be able to play a game in a handheld device that could fit in your hand or your pocket was huge. We're going to see that now. So there's something big coming along the lines, and people talk about VR and the metaverse. I still think that's got a way to go yet. But yeah, anyway, I do digress a little bit. Please ask me another question.
Yes, well, it was pretty interesting, which is why I didn't want to cut you off. Nonetheless, when we talk about revolutions, and you're right that while VR or metaverse is still sort of a distant dream for a lot of gamers, but quite a few of the top firms, and I'm talking about Web2 firms, like even Google came out with their Oculus, which had a sort of a gameplay. Xbox VR, PSVRs. I mean, there have been a lot of devices being introduced. What would, according to you, Russell, be the next big thing in gaming? And when do you sort of anticipate it? While I wouldn't expect any sort of predictions from you, despite we love predictions as a space. I'm not going to expect that. But when do you sort of expect a shift, or when do you sort of expect another revolutionary product or technology take over gaming? Because right now it is what it is. What would be the next big thing, though?
Well, like you say, there's some hardware devices coming out. Apple are releasing their units as well that are due out soon. That looks really interesting, and it's quite an advance on the previous iterations of goggles or VR headsets that we've had out there. I don't think headsets are quite there, in all honesty, to be able to sort of say there's going to be a massive adoption of the metaverse thanks to these goggles and stuff. But it's certainly heading in the right direction. I take my kids as a prime example. I bought them a headset a couple of years ago, and to be honest, they haven't touched it in over a year now. And I think it says a lot. If kids don't pick these things up and use them regularly, it says a lot about the product isn't quite there. And I think it's too heavy, it's too clunky. So it certainly needs to improve, and I think these future iterations will eventually get there, and it will become much more user friendly. When it comes to massive development and what I think is going to be the next breakthrough for gaming, I think it's going to be adoption of blockchain technology from traditional gamers. And we're starting to see some interesting projects out there that are issuing sort of one-click sort of onboarding process from fiat to blockchain. Where you don't need to know how to, or you don't have to understand how blockchain and cryptocurrencies work. You can basically do your transactions on a gaming platform exactly the same way as you would have done in the Web2 space, by going on, transferring from your credit card some US dollars or some euros or whatever currency you are around the world into a particular token. And that token can be used cross-chain. Basically, that's going to be the next improvement. And there are some wallets out there that are currently doing some of that, but it's not across enough chains to make it widely adoptable. So we're actually looking at that for our platform ourselves. There's a few products out there that we're looking at the moment. So I think in order to sort of really have a breakthrough in this space, it's bringing those 3 billion sort of gamers into this space, basically into the blockchain space. And I think if they don't even know they're using cryptocurrency to pay for transactions and they're playing games, they're going to be no worse off. They're not going to know the difference between that and using US dollars or euros, to be honest, for their transactions. As far as they're concerned, it's a currency. They're clicking on the button, they can play their game. And if we can make it as simple as that for them, I think that's going to be the big breakthrough. We'll start to see a lot of indie games and certainly AAA games moving into the space once they start seeing the adoption rates start to pick up. And I think we're going to start seeing that towards the end of this year. And 2024 is going to be a big breakthrough year for gaming in the Web3 space.
Let's hope so. And you did mention that quite a few developing nations are sort of producing games, and there's sort of geographical shift that happened from when the gaming space took off to now. If you could just decode that a little bit, and how, in terms of different geographies, the development of Web3 gaming is looking like. What sort of developing economies are sort of monetizing on this opportunities? What sort of economies are missing out on this? A little bit of clarity on that would be great.
Yeah, so when it comes to sort of game development and stuff, what we're seeing with partners and discussions that we're having around the market is that what used to be 20 years ago mainly run by AAA gaming studios in affluent nations, where they controlled, all their games, their productions, it was all done in-house. What we're starting to see now is a lot of these developing nations where the cost of labor is cheaper, where those skills are being outsourced to those nations. So it's no longer done all in-house under one studio anymore. So you're getting a lot of these partners in the likes of India who can basically build a game quite quickly, have got the resources and the skills there. And I think there's partly they have the training, the universities that have provided that education for those developers to come there. And there's a lot of them now. And that certainly has helped or shift the industry in that direction. I think when it comes to sort of that sector of the gaming industry, it's no different than any other sector. If you look at manufacturing industries, a lot of the manufacturing is done in China, where a lot of our goods come from, and it gets shipped around the world. I think a lot of clothing comes from India and Bangladesh and places like that. And the reason being is the labor is cheaper, and it's cheaper to get those products manufactured there. And when it comes to the gaming industry, it's cheaper to have your game made with, some studios in those countries where the labor is cheaper. But there's also another aspect is we're starting to see the advent of AI now. And a lot of game development, what we're starting to see, can actually be produced by AI as well now. So we'll probably see another shift coming on the back end of this shift that we've seen where the production's been doing in third world countries. And it may well stay there as long as they stay on top of the newest developments in the industry with AI and stuff. So it's an interesting space to watch. So yeah,
I was the integration of AI and blockchain gaming would have been my next question. So thanks for already pointing it out. AI has its hands in almost every space, whatever you talk about, be it generating content or music, art, and I'm guessing gaming as well now. So how would AI be sort of a part of blockchain gaming? And like you mentioned, that could be the next breakthrough, but how would that sort of a future look like? And I mean, I'm exactly not able to envision something like that. And we know that the development of a game is not just the development or back end, it's the story, it's the characters. How would that look like when done from an AI perspective?
So it's quite interesting. At the moment, a lot of the AI work and monetization is actually done in text. So it's all text related sort of AI input really and output. There is a lot of video and image sort of AI there. And I think a lot of the influencers and YouTubers seem to be using it quite productively. What we're also seeing is there's some big sort of IT companies out there that are trying to offer their services where they're creating bespoke AIs for companies and things like that, or they're trying to onboard them onto their AI. So I think what we are seeing is at the end of the day, it's about its business, isn't it? It's about monetizing the technology. And what we're seeing them doing is they're trying to bring customers on board to use their AI because it's all about data gathering. And we can go back into the whole decentralized thing about how we protect ourselves, but that's a completely different conversation. I could go ages for that. But when it comes to sort of the AI and how it's going to play into gaming, there's a few little ways we can look at this in. We're looking at it ourselves as having it as a policeman on our platform, so to speak, that basically can monitor, sort of make sure there's no underage and misbehavior happening on our platform, that the content is appropriate and the person playing the games is age appropriate. So that's something we're looking at. We're also looking at when we're onboarding Web2 users, we can have an AI butler there that can basically say to them, look, this is the best token for you to be onboarded on if you want to play games on the Ethereum and the Binance Smart Chain. Or you might want to be onboarded onto this token if you're going to be playing those games. And it will know that by looking at your behavior on the gaming platform. So all that sort of stuff is really interesting, and it will be sort of almost live tracking of things and actually prompting people in certain directions. So that's quite an interesting sort of aspect of how AI can be used and certainly implemented into platforms in this day and age. I think going forward, there is some interesting ideas I've seen out there with AI, and one of them was basically people can depend on their game style. So, for example, if you were to play GTA, for example, I don't know if you're familiar with that game. Everybody's a little bit different on how they like to play it and interact it in the world. And you could almost sell, if you're quite popular or you're good at what you're doing, you could almost sell your style of gameplay in the format of an NFT, and an AI could be creating and tracking that for you. So all that stuff is really interesting. I think AI's got a lot of legs when it comes to helping or assisting employment for people in up and coming or third world developing nations. So that's really interesting. There's a lot AI could certainly help and assist with. I don't think the adoption is necessarily going to happen as quickly as people are saying it is. I think it's going to be a matter of trial and error and just seeing what sort of innovations come up with it. But yeah, that's kind of the areas that we're looking at for ourselves when it comes to AI, is more sort of like a butler on our platform, really assisting people and directing them in the right place, and certainly helping to educate them when it comes to sort of blockchain technology.
Absolutely. That would be like, those would be a good few first steps for the integration of AI and blockchain. If I talk about getting back to our earlier discussion about how different bull markets versus bear markets are, and you as an entrepreneur, I'm sure you've by now seen at least 3 bear markets. How does business differ, and how affected was blockchain gaming, I think, in the last couple of years? I'm pretty sure the last 1 year looked a little tight, especially for play to earn games, largely because the tokens that were associated with them also saw a dip. So, I mean, how affected was the industry at large due to the bear market? And do you think that blockchain gaming as an industry can sort of dissociate from the larger crypto market, or are they going to move hand in hand in the future as well?
Okay, so I'll try and address the first bit of the question about the bull market or bear and bull market.
A second if needed.
Yeah. So me personally, just like any business, to be honest, if you're in a bear market, it's hard. It's hard graft, and everybody's going for the same thing. Cash is tight, so trying to raise funds is difficult. It's certainly obviously the opposite in a bull market, where everybody's trying to throw money at you if you've got a good idea. So that's a big difference from a startup point of view. When it comes to from a development point of view, I touched on it earlier on. It's in a bear market, it's a great time to be developing a project, because you're just getting on with the job. And what you find is that development that you've done in those 2 years of a bear market, it will pay off, tenfold by the time you come up into a bull market. So that's kind of how it is at the moment, and kind of what we've experienced certainly over the last couple of sort of bear and bull markets. With regards to sort of gaming and where that's come along in the last sort of bear and bull market, is that GameFi was quite an immature space just a few years ago, and we used to see a lot of projects sort of go to market. They'd launch their tokens, they'd mint some NFTs, and they'd raise millions of dollars. And within the space of 4 to 5, 6 months, that project would have died. And a lot of the reason based around that is their tokenomics just weren't sustainable. And we used to see that in project after project after project. They basically used to put their tokenomics prior to the storyline or the game or the gaming experience. So if we've learned one lesson from all of those markets, is to make sure that you concentrate on the storyline of your game first and foremost. You need to have a good working, enjoyable game that people want to come back and play again and again. And if it makes sense to integrate blockchain into those games, whether that's an NFT or whether that's a token, then you can do so at a later date, but you need to get that storyline right first, because what a lot of them were doing is they would think of the finances first. They wanted to make money by minting some NFTs and tokens, and that was a big mistake, because what they ended up doing is creating pyramid schemes that were totally reliant on more and more people coming into the game for that game to do well and survive. And at the end of the day, what you end up getting is you get the bull market, everybody's doing well playing the game, and as soon as the market starts to dive, people start to pull their money out, and when they start pulling out, that pyramid scheme starts falling to pieces and the tokenomics fall to crap, really. So and those projects end up dying. So what we're seeing now, and what I'm certainly seeing, is certainly in this bear market, the people that are building games in GameFi are a lot more mature. They're building the game first, they're building the storylines first, and then they're thinking about how to integrate their tokens into it. And that, in me, is a much healthier ecosystem or a method of building a game in the Web3 space. So what we'll start to see is a lot more better games coming out as a result of this, and we'll start to see games that are much more sustainable in the long term. So what we'll start to get eventually, maybe in a year or 2 years' time, is the reputation of the gaming and the Web3 space will be in a far better place then than it currently is now.
Absolutely. And would do you think that GameFi would be able to dissociate from the larger Web3 space or the crypto market, essentially?
So that's a funny one. I think it all comes down to perception, really. And if people perceive GameFi to be blockchain, and that's kind of how it's perceived to be now, is that if you're playing a game with blockchain integration into it, it's crypto. And a lot of people just aren't interested in that. And that's why we're struggling to attract a lot of those Web2 users. So we need that reputation, that tarnish that the crypto space has to go, or certainly to improve, in order for that image to change and for GameFi to not be considered crypto or to have a bad omen over it. So that's going to take time. It's not going to happen overnight. But I think, like I touched on early on, the more we have better and better games coming out that are sustainable, that actually show that they work, then that reputation will start to change, and that perception that people have with GameFi will certainly get better and better as time goes on.
Absolutely. If I'm not wrong, sometime in 2021, end of 2021, was when Axie Infinity, Decentraland, and a few other coins along with the game sort of boomed, and that got a lot of interest into blockchain gaming and play to earn sort of games. However, that was again followed by long-term silence, and if you looked at numbers, they weren't as pleasing for a lot of blockchain games, and quite a few of the mainstream media organizations, so to say, were sort of talking about how gameplay sort of looks different for a lot of Web2 games versus Web3 games, which sort of lacked the right kind of development. So do you think that is something that is being changed now? Do gameplays look better for newer blockchain games, play to earn games, or how has that sort of shifted the development itself?
So it's a quite interesting question, and yes, I think there's certainly been some improvements, certainly from 2021 with Axie Infinity. It's quite a big question to sort of answer, because the demographics of gamers around the world are so different, right? Yeah. And if I was to sort of break it down a little bit, in North America and developed nations and around Europe and stuff, they love their AAA games. They love Web2 traditional gaming. And what we're seeing is in the developing nations like Africa, India, Southeast Asia, they love Web3. And you've got to understand your user base, really, and what is it that's motivating them to play these games, all these different styles of games. And it comes down to, in those developing nations, they're looking for somewhere to make some money. So GameFi to them is really popular. They love it. And the reputation there is a little bit different than it is in those developed nations where they just don't want to touch GameFi. So it's an interesting place to be in at the moment. I certainly think that the gaming industry will move on, and those developed nations will start to adopt GameFi. The majority of the press, which you touched on out there, and the bad headlines do come from these developed nations, where the tarnished reputation of blockchain and crypto comes from. What you'll start to see is, once these big gaming studios start to realize that they're losing their customer base for their traditional business models, they will start to sort of veer into the blockchain through third parties, which we're seeing already. and dipping their toes in the space. And then once they realize that actually they can adapt their business models and start veering into the Web3 space, those headlines or those people that are releasing the headlines will start to reduce, and you'll start to get more and more positive headlines coming out. And it's not going to happen quickly, but it will happen. And it takes coercion sometimes for these headline writers or these editors to sort of change their mind on things, and they'll start speaking to some of these big gaming companies. That's quite interesting because we saw quite a few companies out recently, big ones, that were saying they were veering into, Sega being one that were going into the space, and then within a matter of weeks they turned around and they said they weren't going to get involved. And a lot of it's political, right? Once we start seeing legislators around the world sort of becoming a little bit more pro blockchain, we'll certainly see those headlines start becoming a little bit more pro blockchain, and we'll start seeing some of those big companies willing to put their reputations at risk and be associated with the Web3 space. So it's an interesting space to be in, but we as early adopters, as entrepreneurs, as startups, are in a great place to capitalize on the Web3 space right now, because when all these new adopters come in, we're going to be there ready to capitalize on it. And those AAA gaming studios are going to be knocking on our door saying, we want your business, or how did you do it? Come and work for us. So yeah, there you go.
Absolutely. The future for sure is bright, and we all know how news cycles work like. Talking about your role as an entrepreneur, what sort of difficulties did you face when you were trying to establish your firm? I'm sure that the way around for no entrepreneur has been easy, especially in the Web3 space where there's so much doubt and there's so many roadblocks as soon as you enter this space. So what were some of the key sort of roadblocks that you faced when you were trying to establish your firm?
That's a really good one. There's quite a few things. I think trust, being in the Web3 space, is massive. And as a startup, as a business person, like, trying to trust people in this space is near on impossible. And a lot of them just don't want to tell you who they are, or they want paying up front for services. And, if you're in a traditional business market, there's no way you would pay thousands of dollars up front for a website developer to do work for you without having some sort of contract in place, or without them producing some service prior to paying that money up. I mean, I have worked in various industries, and you always pay in installments. And it would seem that this Web3 space is very immature when it comes to that. There doesn't seem to be many people that work to contract. And the ones that do usually are companies that have a place of work and an office of work, and they tend to charge more money. So that is a big obstacle. There are things that have come out over the years called escrow accounts. That's quite an interesting model. And you can go through. There are actually Web3 recruitment agencies now that are coming out, one of which that we've partnered with, who basically will have like an escrow account where someone like myself can actually deposit some funds into it, and they're not actually released until the goods are produced or the service has been provided. So that's one area that we really struggled with. Finding strong and capable people in the space as well is quite hard, and that's partly due to trust, really, and being able to do proper vetting of these individuals. But if you're able to do that, or you have people already on board, then it's not too bad. But we did struggle with that initially, trying to find some good people for us, or to work with us. We've got a small team at the moment of 4 people, and trying to bring those initial people on board, I had to go through an umpteen number of interviews and things like that, as you would do in a normal space. But it's not easy. But finding the good ones, when you get them, you hold on to them. The other bit that's really hard in this space is marketing. And that goes back to the sort of trust side of things. Is everybody wants paying up front when it comes to Web3 marketing. And yeah, it's not great. It needs to sort of move on. It needs to improve. And as startups, we don't have we don't have unlimited amount of funds. So we can't just throw money away at everything. That's certainly at marketing. So that is an area that's really tricky. And there's plenty of good sort of projects out there that can certainly assist when it comes to marketing. So that's a tricky area, I certainly would say, with anybody that's looking to get into this space as a entrepreneur or as a startup. Marketing is a really tough area to sort of navigate.
I'm sure people made notes and would be looking out for these troubles. And the ones who are already in this space are well aware of these so-called roadblocks that I'm sure all of us have faced in the the Web3 space.
Mm,
Getting back to your role as an investor, you earlier did mention how you started off in the space investing, and I'm
mm,
sure that as an early investor, it's always difficult to pick and choose where you want to invest in, especially if we speak about a space like Web3. And you rightly said that more often than not, we cannot attach a face value to where we're investing.
mm.
So, how did you navigate your way as an investor? What were some of your sure short investments, and what sort of suggestions would you have for early investors in this space?
I think what we tend to see a lot of in this space is, I think I've mentioned it a few times, there's quite a bit of immaturity and people expect to get rich overnight in the blockchain space. And the reality is more people lose money in this space than they do actually make money. But unfortunately, they get pulled in with these fancy dreams and these influencers out there with big, fast, love, shiny cars. But the reality is that's not what it's like. And it's a very risky sort of environment to sort of invest in. I've invested in stocks before and in real estate and various different assets. But coming into this space, what I loved about it was extremely pioneering. And I love the fact that you get startup companies that you can actually take an involvement and a stake in. And you don't just have to buy the token on the NFTs. If you want to be a proactive member of their community, you've got the option of doing that, and that's out there, which you don't really get to out in the real world with a lot of these businesses that you invest in. So that if you're an investor that likes to get involved in projects and show a real interest, then I think it's a great space to invest in. But you need to accept that there's a lot of risk that comes with it. I think me as an investor, and if I was to give anybody a bit of advice, and it's no financial advice, by the way, is that you need to identify yourself at what type of investor you are. I've always been a long-term investor. I've always, even when I've invested in cryptocurrencies, I've always had a few years sort of long-term plan of sort of enter and exit strategies. I've never seen myself as a day trader. I think you have to be extremely good to be a day trader and make money in this space. And it certainly isn't for anyone. So I would say to anybody that's new in the space, steer clear of day trading. You will lose your money. But if you're looking for genuine projects to invest in, I think one of the first criteria, and probably the most important, is the team behind the project. Do your research, make sure you find out who they are, what they're doing, are they capitalized, what is their plans. Just imagine yourself as a banker, really. If someone was coming to ask you for money, what is it you would want to know from them? And try and de-risk any sort of investment you make as much as possible to the point where there's almost no risk left. And then if you're satisfied, depending on what type of investor you are and the level of risk you're taking, then that might be a time where you consider whether you want to get involved in that or not. But yeah, that's kind of it, really. That's my advice or my bit.
Some pretty great pieces of advice out there. When you did mention that finding genuine projects is something that people should be looking out for. However, when we talk about this space, and the Web3 space has often been bashed for having a lot of noise. And when I say noise, I basically mean, and I was attending a conference where someone said that a lot of projects in the Web3 space are coming up with solutions for problems that don't exist. And that was a statement that sort of stuck with me. And I realized that there are, in fact, quite a few projects out there that are coming up with problems that, with solutions that don't have, that aren't problems even. So, I mean, how do you sort of look at a firm, a project, or a product and realize whether it's just noise or whether they're actually doing something legit?
So if I was to say or give someone any advice when it relates to that, is really you need to be picking a sector that you have an interest in, because then you'll have a much better understanding of that sector. I certainly myself wouldn't be invested in something that was related to farming, for example. Although I eat the food that comes from farms, I don't have any understanding of how farms work, or the business models and how they monetize their products. So that if there was a project that was basically trying to tokenize, some of their byproduct or produce, I certainly probably would steer clear of that, just because I have no interest in that area. But if there was a project in gaming, which there is a lot of in the Web3 space, I have much better knowledge base and understanding of how the industry works. So therefore, I can actually see whether they're trying to provide a solution to a problem. or whether they're basically trying to provide a solution to something that a multitude of other projects are already doing. So it's a lot easier to see something that you have knowledge of than it is to try and get involved into something that you don't have any knowledge of. So that should help sort of narrow down what you're looking at and try and eliminate a lot of the noise that is out there, and concentrate on projects that you're interested in, that you want to get involved with and be an active investor in.
Absolutely, that does make a lot of sense. We're almost heading towards the end of our time, and I think my last and final question to you, Russell, would be: what are some of the great pieces of advice that you've received as an entrepreneur that you'd want to give to our audiences or people who are looking to start out in this space?
Oh, that's a really good one. I would say do your research, whatever you get, whether it's an investment or whether you are a entrepreneur and you're looking to come into the market, do your research. And then my next bit of advice would be find yourself a coach or a mentor. Certainly if you're looking to start up in the space, because that one person will save you so much money, so much time, and contacts in the space. It is unbelievable. If you try to come into this space by yourself and try to learn along the way whilst building your own project or investing, you're going to get severely burnt and lose a lot of money. So yeah, make sure you've got someone there to sort of guide you in the right direction. I would say that's probably the best piece of advice I can give someone.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. And really interesting, a very, very insightful session, especially for me, and I'm sure for all of our guests here. Thank you so much for joining us today, Russell. It was a great session indeed, and I hope I can see you again on our show really soon sometime.
I'm sure we will. And thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. All right.
Thank you. The pleasure was all ours. Bye-bye.
Okay.
We'll
Bye-bye.
see you next week with another really interesting guest. And in the meantime, big shout out to Russell and 8-Bit. Go ahead, follow him on all his social media websites, and keep looking for what him and his firm are up to. Thank you again for joining us today.
Bye-bye.